I mean, eventually we're going to dive into that story world anyways, whether it's before or after. So why not take the time to get to know it before?
The writing world is often divided between plotters and pantsers, those who create an outline for their story before diving in, and those who like to write by the seat of their pants.
I see my outline and I'm like, oh, I can add foreshadowing here. I can add a really great twist here. In my brain, I was able to move things around before I actually started writing.
My guest today is Kimberly Grymes. She's written a number of young adult fantasy novels, but her most recent project is a workbook to help writers plan out their stories.
And so I just kind of took everything, the brainstorming worksheets, the outlining worksheets, the character development worksheets, and I just put them in a workbook.
We chat all about planning your novel, and we also dig into Kimberly's writing journey, as well as her upcoming fantasy sequel, A Vengeful Shade. Whether you're an outliner or you discover your story as you write, I hope you stick around. There's something here for everyone. Welcome to the greatest podcast in the multiverse, where each week I talk to science fiction and fantasy authors about myth, magic, and the infinite possibilities of storytelling. I'm your host, Herman Stewart-Engel, and I will be taking you on a journey with some of your favorite authors. Ready to explore? Because on this show, every conversation is a doorway into a different world. So welcome back to the greatest podcast in the multiverse. I'm very excited for the return of Kimberly Grymes today. Welcome here, Kimberly.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. I'm glad to have you back. How have things been going lately?
Pretty busy, but
Yeah.
I guess that's kind of our nature, just busy. So managing it all.
Yeah, so for our listeners who maybe didn't tune into our first episode and maybe don't know who you are, can you just give us a brief history about you and your writing journey?
Yes, hi, I am Kimberly Grymes. I am a young adult multi-genre author, focusing more in the fantasy genre. My first series is a science fiction and fantasy duology, and my current trilogy series is a young adult dark fantasy, but it's more teen appropriate, but it does have some medieval violence in it.
And how long have you been writing for?
I've been writing for about, oh my gosh, I think it's going on 15 years now. But publishing, I first published my debut in 2021, but it took some time, to get to grasp how to write a novel. So
Right. Yeah, the first one always takes the longest, right?
Right. Yeah. It's a learning experience.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and sorry, how many novels did you have published altogether?
3 currently, my duology series, and then book 1 in my trilogy, and then book 2 comes out in November. So
Perfect.
getting closer to that 5 under the belt. They say once you've got 5, then you're experienced or something. I don't know.
Oh, right. Cool. And so when did you start? I know, so you published in 2021, but you started writing 15 years ago?
Yeah, it was more or less 15 years ago.
Okay. So were you writing like things like short stories, or do you have a couple novels that you wrote and put in the drawer somewhere?
No, actually, I had my first book, the debut book. I had just focused on that one, and I had written it in like 2 years. I was like, I wrote a book, and then I sent it to a development editor, and she was like, "Oh, you do not know how to write a book."
Oh no.
Oh, I mean, but it was a learning experience for me.
Yeah.
I learned, the head hopping thing, the too many character. I mean, all of the things that we put in that first story.
Right.
So I learned a lot, and then I was like,
Yeah.
I'm going to do this right. So we took the time,
Nice.
read some books, blogs, and stuff.
That's great. So your first book that you published was actually the first book that you wrote.
Yes. So the first book I published was the first book I've ever written, any story, anything. It was that. And then I wrote 3 short stories and had them published in 3 different anthologies because I wanted to learn more about tightening a story. And
Okay.
I wanted to learn more about how to just, keep it to the important facts. And I thought a short story is a great way to do that. So.
For sure. Yeah, it always just interests me, the journey that every writer's journey is a bit different, right? So it always interests me to see kind of the path each writer went down to get to where they're at,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So I guess, and I'm veering away from the questions here. What was the biggest takeaway for you in that process? Because you published that duology, you're now writing your fifth book, or it's probably written, but it's coming out soon.
Yeah, that my fourth book is coming out.
Your fourth book. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. What have you learned from the first book being out to these coming books?
A lot has changed in my writing style. I am huge on feedback, and I take it and I apply it. So, whether it's from critique partners, whether it's from other authors, whether it's from reviews, what is being said is what I take and I apply to my writing going forward. And that really has evolved my writing from book one to even now. My line editor is like, and I've had the same line editor since book one of my first series. And she has said, I have seen such a tremendous growth in
That's awesome.
my writing, but not just my writing, but I have a learning disability in, I don't know if it's dyslexia, like this, or comprehension, but grammar, I will fail a grammar test. Literally, like that's one of the things that scare me the most is just my understanding of grammar. But that's why we have editors, and I have stories to
Exactly.
tell, and they help me take my stories that I've and put it into the proper way. But I've learned so much over these years just from reading reviews, getting the feedback, and then, learning that I need to tighten the story. That's why I did some short stories. Um, and something I've really, really thrived on lately is creating those plot twists, creating those surprise moments, and making sure the foreshadowing is in the right spot. And I think with Shade of Light, the first book in my trilogy, that was a lot of the reviews were just like those wow moments. And that's what I was aiming for. And I'm just so happy that that's kind of that's where I kind of want to be known for.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm interested to hear in a bit of your process in doing that, but I think we'll save that till a bit later on because we're going to talk a lot about planning a bit later in the interview. I'm curious though, what made you decide to start writing that first book?
The first book, well, I didn't really read a lot. Like I said, I struggled with comprehension and grammar, and but I started listening to audiobooks and the Mortal Instruments and a lot of YA books. And the YA fantasy is different than high fantasy. So for me, the way that, because when you tell a story for the young adult audience, you want to hold that teen attention. And so things are a lot faster, things are more relatable. Like it's not high fantasy, there's not a lot of content that is created and you have to remember, which I love high fantasy stories. Like I can watch movies and I will just be completely immersed into it. But when it comes to reading, my brain has a little bit of a lag. And so the young adult just really, really drew me in. And so listening to those audiobooks, and I was like, I want to do this.
That's
I don't know
awesome.
how, but I want to.
Yeah, but you've figured it out, which is fantastic, and that's really cool and something I've never really even thought about because yeah, like I love picking up a YA fantasy book for that reason. It's quick, it's easy to digest, and I can get something off of my TBR pile a little quicker than
Yes.
picking up a big epic high fantasy that you kind of not that it's necessarily a slog, but that you slog through for. I'm a slower reader, so it takes me about a month to get through a large epic
Yeah.
fantasy
Well,
book.
you have to pay more attention and you
Hmm.
can't, for high fantasy books, I feel like you have to set a time. Like you can't read a page, like a chapter and then come back a week later. It's like
Right.
watching a series and then 2 years later they come out with season two and you're like, I don't even remember what happened.
Yeah, 100%. Very cool. So you wrote that first duology, and obviously you loved the process of writing. So what keeps you coming back to it?
The community. I mean, honestly, I without the support of community writer friends, author friends, reader friends, I mean, I really feel like, why are we doing this? And we go through waves of imposter syndrome, or, like, what am I doing? Am I doing this right? But having that community really keeps me back. I have so many great author friends who I can text and just be like, I'm in a rut, I'm stuck with this, and they'll be like, let me boost you. And vice versa. I've had people, call me up and say, ugh. And it's just so great to have this community. And I really feel like if I didn't write, I'd still want to be involved because there's so many
Right.
amazing people.
Yeah, 100%. That's really cool. And I mean, that's a really good point because I think people get the sense that writing is really a lonely journey. And I mean, it can be for some people that if they don't reach out, but there is a huge community out there willing to interact and answer questions and help you along the
Oh,
way.
yeah.
So I love that. Yeah. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
couldn't agree more. There's so many like, even like through, I mean, we're both part of Sasha's Rebel Author group where I'm met so many people just doing this podcast. Just that's one of the main reasons that I continue going with the podcast is all the amazing people that I've met and built relationships
Right.
with because of it. Right. So
Like I don't think people realize how much goes into running a podcast, but at the same
yeah.
time, the rewards are just like, it's so great to meet so many people and just
Mhm.
meet people that they know, and it's a web of networking.
100%. Yeah, so now we chatted last summer, and I can't believe it's been a full year since we've
I know,
we've
has it been?
talked. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, because I think you were like episode. I want to say you're episode 5 or 6, and that would have it might have aired. Yeah, it would have aired in August. So we're pretty much exactly a year
Wow.
from now.
Congratulations! Like you're one
Thank you.
year or
Yeah,
around it.
yeah, yeah. Actually that probably passed me by, and I didn't even realize that we hit that 1 year mark. Yeah, because this will be episode 45, I think. So I
It's
did skip a few
amazing.
weeks over Christmas and that sort of thing last year, but yeah, so I had no idea that this would still be going after a year, but yeah, but so you're here. It's a year later. Can you give our listeners an update about what's changed in the last year for you?
Um, for writing, I've been trucking along on this trilogy series. Shade of Light came out in October last year, and I've been working on book two. It took me a few months to kind of set in stone the first two chapters because that's a big thing for me. I can't move forward until those first act one chapters are good. But then it just came to me, and then so I've been working on that this year. I've also been working on a workbook to help writers with their brainstorming and outlining. It's an evolved workbook that has I process I use, and then I shared on Etsy for a few years with some digital downloads, and it just became so popular, and I got the feedback was so great, so I really have been working on that as well, and that'll be coming out in August as my first Kickstarter. And so
Yeah,
that's kind of it. Just been trucking along with those two projects.
yeah, cool. Yeah, we'll talk about both of those in a little more detail. I find it interesting though that you say that you need to get your first few chapters set
Yeah.
before you can continue on with the rest. I'm really the
Hmm.
opposite. I know I've heard our friend Sasha Black talk about this as well. She just assumes she's going to rewrite the first chapter, and I've gotten to the point where I'm the same way. Like the first couple chapters, I'm just assume are going to change by the time I get to the end because if I don't get past them and let them be rough and probably wrong, I'll never get keep moving, and then I'll probably once I do, I'll probably come back and change them anyway. um,
Yeah.
but but I know that you are a planner, and I am not so much a planner. So by the time I get to the end, I realize that the beginning of my story needs to be slightly different, oftentimes. So yeah, but that's cool. That just struck me as interesting. Um, how about other books? What have you been reading the last year? Anything that our listeners might want to pick up?
Well, I've been surprisingly reading a lot more, what are they, romantasy, fantasy
Okay.
romance.
Yeah.
Just because I want to learn writing romance is an art of its own. And I
Hmm.
mean, I am not a romance writer, but I really want to learn the story beats for romance writing to kind of incorporate into the YA level of romance
Yeah.
into some stories going forward. So I've been reading um, the some books. I mean, Fourth Wing and stuff, but they're
Yeah.
not.
Right.
Those aren't YA. But I just kind of wanted to learn more of the story beats. So I've been just
Yeah,
kind of focusing more on those.
for sure. Yeah, yeah. You can take this. I mean, the because romanticy, I think, and romance in general has very specific beats that it
Hmm.
follows. And I think
Yeah,
even though things like yeah, Fourth Wing and Akatar and those sort of things aren't YA necessarily, they
right.
the story structure still applies to a YA story, right? So
Yeah,
I
the
think
the
that's
beats they hit, you know.
yeah.
So
Mhm. Yeah, really cool. Cool. So I want to talk about your books a little bit more. We talked about Shades of Light last time we talked, but it hadn't come out yet. So first of all, I guess, can you give our listeners just a little bit of recap about Shades of Light and what it's all about?
of course. So it's YA dark fantasy, but again, it's YA. So the medieval violence in it is teen appropriate. I like to think of it as if you like shows like Wednesday or earlier seasons of like Stranger Things, it's on that YA dark level. It's more internal conflict. So the main character, Adele, she has the ability to infiltrate people's minds. And when she was 10, she was taken and forced to use that ability to basically interrogate people for this like tyrannical general. And then she escapes just because she discovers a family member while she's out on one of these tours with the general. And she discovers a family member she comes across and sees her healing somebody with her blood. And so now the main character is like, what's going on? Maybe I'm not cursed. Maybe there's more to the story. So she escapes. And that's basically where chapter one starts. So chapter one starts with her escaping, and then she goes back to her home village, and there are otherworldly beings there who have the same ability as Adele, which raises more questions. And so it's more of a journey about finding where she belongs and why she is the way she is, and just coming to terms with, okay, this is who I am and I need to accept it, and making the choice of, okay, I can hurt people or I can not hurt people. And just because I can hurt people doesn't mean I have to. So it's a self-reflecting journey,
Right.
um, adventure, lots of surprise twists, which I was so thrilled people were excited about those surprise scenes. And I just found family. It's I feel like it's a great YA story.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
it didn't end on a cliffhanger because originally it was supposed to be a standalone.
Okay.
But then I was like, there's so much more to this world. So
Nice.
that's when I decided to expand.
Yeah, that's great. So it can be read as a standalone, even though
It
there
can
is more
be.
to the story. Is that? Yeah. Okay. Cool. How did the launch of that go? Because I know we talked a couple months before launch last year. Were you launch went well for you?
Yeah, I worked with Shannon with R&R Book Tours, who is amazing, and
Hmm.
she organized the whole launch tour and got everybody together. And for a week, we just spread the word and posted, and it was great. It was fantastic.
Awesome.
And I mean, I go to events now, and it's so great for people to come up to me and be like, "Oh, I've seen your book on TikTok," or,
That's awesome.
"I've seen your book online," and it's like, oh, that makes me feel so good.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's such a cool feeling, isn't it? I've had that happen a couple times with this book, and I see reviews and like I've seen this all over TikTok. I'm like, oh, okay, well, it
It
feels like that what
is.
I've been doing has been worthwhile.
Right? When people,
Somebody
I mean,
saw it.
hey, you guys listening, watching this, if you see an author and you've heard of their book or seen it, just go up and say it and you will just completely make their day. So
Yeah,
it's amazing feeling.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it really is. Um, cool. So, can you tell us a little bit about the second book in the series now that it's coming out in a couple months without giving too many spoilers away?
Okay, so I don't know. Have you written a trilogy? Like you've written like series before, right?
I have not written a complete series, but I've written
But
series. Yes.
right, right.
Yeah.
So I feel like book two is hard because book
Hmm.
one is that opening book. You've got a lot of introductions, a lot of, and then book three in a trilogy is that epic conclusion that, like it's going to be epic and the big. And then you've got book two right there in the middle. And I think I had such anxiety about what is this story going to carry over and how do I keep it really interesting?
Right.
But then I figured it out, and it's an amazing story, and I'm so excited. And
That's awesome.
I mean, it's my first cliffhanger out of any book I've ever written, any story. I've
Mhm.
never written a cliffhanger. Um, so I was really nervous about this, and so I guess we'll see if people love it or are gonna send me DMs saying WTF.
Well, hopefully, though, if they've gotten to the end of book 2 in the series, that they're invested enough that they'll go to book 3 anyway, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, I would hope it's quick. So that was one of the things from the reviews from Shade of Light where people were saying it was really fast fantasy story. Like normally fantasy stories go on for 500 pages or so, or it's 20 plus hours for audiobook. My
Right.
audiobook was 9 hours.
Mhm.
It's a very fast read. It's only 300 pages. So I had to take that input and I was like, okay, I need to make book two a little bit longer. But I have a tendency just to have a very fast pace. And so it's really not much longer. So I hope people aren't too I mean, it's not too much longer. But book two is about
Yeah.
it's without spoiling, it has basically the same characters. There's a few new characters. But so I like to take in book one, Adele's perspective is basically as we learn about the world from her point of view. So in book two, we get to expand a little bit on that story world, and so we are going into a different part of the story world, which I'm really excited about. So it's a snowy story world, lots of ice, lots of cold temperatures. So that was fun to write.
Cool. Yeah, something a little bit different in the setting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for going in from book 1 and finishing that off and heading into book 2, was there anything that either you learned in that process that made book 2 easier or anything that was challenging? I know you talked about trying to figure something, you didn't want that middle book syndrome of book 2, but was there anything else that was challenging for you?
Um, I always struggle with character voice. Because I get so invested in just telling the story, I tend to forget to jump back and make sure you can identify with the characters. So that is something I constantly have to remind myself to go back and make sure the reader knows who's talking and those little quirks and habits and make sure they're all in. So that's kind of the thing I've been just trying to focus on and making sure I hit
Right.
because I tend to just get so invested in telling the story.
Cool. Yeah, that's really cool. So now I was interested because I saw on your social media that you're running a feature tour for Shades of Life, and it's going to be up this the week that this episode airs. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that's all about?
So, with this go around, I'm trying a different launching company with Sarah, and it's Behind the Pages, and she's been amazing so far. Like I love Shannon with our book tours, but I think it's really good to try other ones just to have experience.
For sure.
And so Sarah's been great. And so she was like, I was nervous about doing ARC signups for book two, um, because I wasn't sure if people would want to sign up for book two because they may not have read book one. So she suggested we do a feature tour. So a feature tour is a few months before the launch of book two, and we just have signups for people who either have read it or want to read it, and to help us kind of just like spread the word and promote it and just kind of refresh everybody before book two comes out. So that is
Right.
happening at the end of
Cool.
August, which will be when we air.
Cool. Yeah, that's a great strategy. Now, so when people sign up for this, what are they getting? Like, what are they getting? Are they getting just an arc for book two and they read book one first? Are they posting to social media during a certain time? Like, how does that look for them?
We send them a book funnel link of book one, so they get the ebook for book one, if they haven't read it. And then during the week for feature week, then they'll post on Instagram. Sarah has them signing up for a day, and then she just reaches out and she says, "Don't forget today's your day. Just do a quick post." And then they have the option if they want to sign up and get book two as an art. I didn't want to be like, okay, here's book one and then here's book two, because I'm like, okay, well, if you didn't like book one, it's okay. You don't have to read book two.
Yeah, so I'd like to move on a little bit from your books now, because you do have a Kickstarter coming this year. You mentioned it kind of in the intro there, but can you tell us a little bit more about what you're planning?
Oh, I'm super nervous about my first Kickstarter, but so excited at the same time. I think that's normal with anything we do the first time.
Totally.
So the workbook originated from Preptober. So Preptober is that month before the popular writing month where you write 50,000 words. Um, and basically it's you have 4 weeks to prep your story. And so what I did a few years ago is I put a checklist on my Etsy shop just to download, just a one sheet checklist for each week. This is what you want to do, starting with, the easy foundations of identifying what kind of story you want to write, the foundations of, like, the genre and everything, and then building up through three different outlines. And then so it was just so popular, and everybody just said this is a great little checklist. And so then I put out a 17 scene story plotting on Excel, where you can basically see each plot just on the one worksheet, and so your whole story is laid out for you right there. And that was also super popular. And so I just kind of took everything I put on my Etsy shop, the brainstorming worksheets, the outlining worksheets, the character development worksheets, and I just put them in a workbook. And
Well,
I am absolutely in love with this workbook. She's pretty thick though.
but
She's a big one,
that's great.
but
Yeah.
but yeah, it's everything. So down from skeleton outlines to the 17 scene plot outlines to 60, you can out summarize up to 60 chapters. So
Hmm. Wow.
it's all there.
Wow. Yeah, all-inclusive workbook. I love it.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about, I mean, obviously the evolution of how this happened from that checklist. Can you tell us a little bit more about Preptober and NaNoWriMo for people who might not be familiar with what those are?
NaNoWriMo is the National Novel Writing Month, which is a very popular month in the writing community, where we kind of just get together and cheer each other on to write 50,000 words in basically November. Um, I, I think that I think people just like getting together and doing the community, cheering, which is amazing. So there's no
Mhm.
actual prizes or anything. It's more or less just reaching that 50,000 words, which is actually
Yeah.
hard. I don't think I've ever done. Have you ever reached the 50? I've never done it.
I've never done NaNoWriMo. The main reason because that's the week or the month where 20 Books Vegas conference is, and I've gone to that,
Uh,
for the last few years. So I didn't
yeah,
want
that
to
takes up a
put
lot of chunk.
Yeah. So I didn't want to attempt to do it during that time, but yeah, I have not written a 50,000 word month.
Yeah, it's actually because it's actually harder, but the way to help you reach that 50,000 is by prepping your story. So the kind of term of Preptober in October, the month before, a lot of writers have coined just to get ready. So everything is ready for when they can just sit down and start writing that 50,000 words. That way you're not distracted, you know what you need to write. And I was like, this is just a genius concept. So I started trying to prep my story. And even though I couldn't write 50,000 words because three kids and craziness, and I never, but something clicked within me about being able to prep. And I was a pantser. My first series is a pantser. And I
Okay.
feel like my writing my writing my writing has gotten better with plotting out and outlining more.
Okay. That's really cool. Now, was it because of that Preptober that you were able to make that switch over to planning?
Yeah, it really just kind of sparked me to, okay, let's plan our story out. And I watched a couple of YouTubers, author tubers, and I think just kind of started realizing that if I did sit down and start, I mean, eventually we're going to dive into that story world anyways, whether it's before or after. So why not
Right.
take the time to get to know it before? Which I've learned so much. Like I said, I see my outline and I'm like, oh, I can add foreshadowing here. I can add a really great twist here. Whereas if you're, and there's nothing wrong with writing, just going in and writing as you write. But in my brain, I was able to move things around before I actually started writing.
Yeah, that's
So,
great. Yeah, because I often find that I'm going back at the end and adding or moving or doing that shifting after everything's written, and it's probably a lot more work when you've got 3,000 words that have to be adjusted than if you did
yeah,
that at the initial stage, right?
and that was my problem where I was adding things, like in my first book, I was adding things which literally would change a lot of the story going forward. And so that's where, in my mind, I had to get the first act in stone. At least, I mean, I knew things might change, but at least I had, those plot beats for act one in stone before I go forward. So, because I know I'm like, if I just write, I'm going to come back and it's going to be writing over and writing over and writing over. And I'm like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I hear you. I try. I definitely attempt to be a plotter, but it usually ends in failure. So sometimes I just decide that I've got to just start writing just to get something,
Yeah.
just the
Well, I'm more
momentum
of
going
a,
for the story.
what do they call it? The
The planters.
planters. That's right.
Yes.
I'm more of a planter. So I will follow my outline to the T in the first act and probably the third act. But I have a skeleton outline and what I want to happen. But if the story takes me in a different direction, which it often does, I won't be like, no, stay the road.
A lot of writers are that way, and I mean I've talked to writers who will write a 20,000 word outline just so that they do stay that course. I'm like, oh, that's a rough draft for for me.
Right? Yeah. Well, I like writing the chapter by chapter summaries too, because like sometimes I'll write a whole chapter, which is, and then sometimes I'm like, nope, this just needs to happen in this chapter.
Okay,
But at least then I can look at each chapter and I have, I could see the story flow moving,
right,
which it motivates me. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to
yeah,
read this story.
that's cool. That's really cool. I started doing something similar to that on my current project where I would just I wanted to get an outline down before I started, and so I just started writing a short, not even a summary, because I found I was getting stuck trying to write summaries. So I would just write basically a skinny draft, and I would just write less of the story. So when I went back, I could edit 200 words instead of 2,000 words, and then I
Right.
could add to it or shuffle it around if I needed to. Not sure if that helped, but I kind of got bored doing
Trial and
that.
error.
So I know,
Trial and
right?
error.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. So if I'm a pantser, which I'm a bit of a plantser as well, but I primarily pants my stories. How might a writing guide like this help me?
Well, besides the worksheets for character development and everything, there's a lot of tips in there regarding your writing or in general people's writing, things to consider, as well as your author journey, things about like, don't forget you need a newsletter, there's tips in there about social media and networking and writing community. So there's a lot in there, that cushions and fluffs the worksheets, um and that also talks about, like things to consider. Don't forget you need to have your main characters, their story arc, and at a certain point they need to change their behaviors and get out of their comfort zone. So I mean, it's all kinds of things as reminders, so you
Yeah,
don't
right,
have to use it as a worksheet as plotting, but you want to recognize that the antagonistic force can be a person or a force. It doesn't necessarily have to be a person. So there's a
right.
lot of things in there that that will help. One of my favorite things is a master character list. So you open it up and there's like you write your names of all your characters because you want to make sure you don't
Nice.
have 5 names that start with the letter B, or, you know.
Right. Yeah.
So having that visual helps.
Yeah. Yeah, I do that all the time. Like
Me
all these
too.
characters have J names. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And so it's generally just a workbook basically for any writer to both
Mhm.
organize your story, but also kind of remind you about different ideas and things you should take into consideration while you're writing, whether that's
Yeah.
pantsing your story or outlining it. I
Yeah.
love
So
it.
it's meant to also like trigger you to remember to do, you know, like there's a section on make sure you listen to your story, you know. There's
Hmm.
so much you can catch when you listen to your story. So it's just a lot of little things to help pantsers, plotters, planters, you know, regardless, trial and error, figure out what works best for you.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool. Now, you did decide to take this to Kickstarters. What was your motivation before trying out a new platform for this?
I'm gonna say it was an author friend. She was like, I'm throwing you under the bus here, Liz. Liz Delton is amazing when it comes to information about not just writing, but reaching and networking, and so she has done some successful Kickstarters, and she said this would be a great opportunity for me to dip my toes in. And I mean when Liz says something, people, you have got to listen. So I was like, okay. But she was great. She, you know, she introduced me to the Facebook group. She introduced me to, you know, she showed me how she did her setup. And so I felt more comfortable
Right.
in not going in blindsided. And so, and again, an amazing group of writers and authors in the Facebook group, Kickstarter for authors. So, an abundance of resource information.
Yeah.
Anthea Sharp, she has so much information. I downloaded her book and it was just, I mean, it's very, very the way my brain can understand it. So I'm still a little nervous, you know, go launch day.
Mhm.
Um, but from what I've heard, um, Kickstarter, if Kickstarter recognizes that your campaign is done well, and they'll actually help promote it. So, crossing my fingers, they like my campaign.
Yeah, that Facebook group is a wealth of information. That helped me so much during my Kickstarter campaign. I didn't even just I linger more than I interact on those types of pages, but I didn't have to ask questions because somebody has had the same problem or question as you have had before. I think I asked one question towards the end of my campaign because I kind of hit a weird plateau, and I just wanted to push past that. But yeah, like so many great resources out there. So I'm
Yeah.
glad
I
that.
think the only thing there's so much information on there regarding special editions and, you know, fiction. And this is a nonfiction workbook. And so I was just like, I'm still trying to figure out like how well a nonfiction resource will do compared to the special editions, the really pretty books.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we'll see.
So I'm interested in how you approach that now, like because with the special editions and the launches and that sort of thing that are they that are fiction books that offer art cards and offer all these different fun rewards. How did you approach that for your campaign, and what kind of stretch goals and that sort of thing? If you're sharing your stretch goals yet, are you offering?
Well, I think that was one of the tips they said is not to share your stretch goals right
Okay.
away. That way you can kind of map out if you wanted to add some or if it's and I'm still playing around with stretch goal ideas. In regards to um what the
Like your add-ons and stuff.
yeah, so the add-ons, you know, I've gotten some uh digital. options, like word tracker for your Excel or Google, and some stuff I have on my Etsy shop that was
Right.
popular. And so I kind of pull
Okay.
them off my Etsy shop, and I'll offer them as add-ons. I've gotten some bookmarks too, um, where they say like week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. So you can like bookmark your book and stuff and stickers and all kinds of stuff. But basically it's really simple. So you can either pick from um, the spiral, which I went with spiral instead of the O-ring for cost, but also because I've heard when you've got a thick book like this with the O-ring, the pages come out, and that can be really
Yeah.
annoying.
Yeah.
So, and then the book for the which look, it's printed like purple. I was like, why is it purple? But I have to fix that. But yeah, so and also Ingram Spark had sent me an email saying that they weren't going to allow me wide distribution, which was kind of like not cool. So it'll just be available the paperback, not the spiral, the paperback bounding later down the road in on Amazon only, or my Etsy shop. But so if people want the spiral bound, I Kickstarter. That's one of the reasons why. So the
Yeah.
Kickstarter will
Okay.
be offering the spiral bound, but after that, it'll just be the paperback.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's good to know because yeah, I can see if it's a workbook, that spiral bound is going to be handy to have.
Yeah, yeah.
Ah.
So I'm excited, and I really hope that it helps
Yeah.
people. I mean, I've shared it with a handful of authors, and they have had all positive feedback, which is great.
Yeah.
I love my
Yeah.
feedback.
For sure. I think it's a phenomenal resource, and I think it's something that'll be very well utilized by a wide number of authors. So I'm excited for you.
Thank you. I'm excited too. I mean, I did it in Affinity Publisher. I don't know if you're familiar with the software. It's
Mm-hmm.
basically like a paint. You layer everything.
Okay, like a
So
Photoshop kind of thing.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
everything in there is layered, and so you have to make sure everything looks good too. That was fun.
Mhm. So you designed the book completely yourself.
Yep. So everything in there, you know, is layers. So this is underneath the words. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to position everything throughout the whole book. So it's not like a setting in Word doc where you can go into the header and change the font or change if you want to. You have to go through each
Fun.
page. Yeah. So
Lots of work, and you seem to put that together pretty quickly from when you first. I imagine you were working on it already, but when you first talked to me about the idea, that wasn't that long ago.
yeah, no, I've been working on it for about a year.
Yeah. Okay.
And I mean, I live at my computer.
I understand. I understand
That's
that all
just
too well.
this I enjoy doing stuff like this is my hobby. I don't do much besides that makes me happy. And movies. I
Yeah.
watch movies with my kids.
Nice. Nice. Yep. I hear you. My life is at the computer as well. So
So the campaign it will be live now when
yeah.
this airs. So I'm really excited that it goes from August 20th until September 5th.
Nice. Yeah, so we're right in the middle of it. I'll be sure to link it down in the show notes and below in the comments. So everyone, please go and check it out because it's going to look great, and I can't wait to see the full layout, how you've set it up there.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Kimberly, what can readers expect from you next? What else are you working on these days?
um so I'm working on book 3 for the trilogy series, the epic finale. Um, and I'm also working on what I've been calling my pitch story.
Okay.
So I was going to write a new series after the trilogy series, but I've pivoted and I've decided to write a standalone fantasy story that I want to pitch. And
Okay.
I've been documenting the process on kind of like a podcast for my newsletter.
Oh, nice.
Um, it's on Spotify. It's called From Ideas to Pages to Publishing. And it's basically just 10 minutes of me talking about what I've done the past 2 weeks for my writing projects.
Cool.
And the pitch story is basically my story from story conception to pitching to literary agents to see what comes about and sharing that process in news and with people. So
That's really
I've
awesome.
started doing that in the past 3 or 4 months.
I love that idea. And I mean, it's a way for you to document the process, but you're also, I mean, there's so many people that are curious about what that process actually looks like behind the scenes because we see these touch points of querying and then, oh, I'm accepted. And you haven't necessarily seen everything that goes on to get to that point. So I think that's a really great idea and a great use of the podcast medium because I mean, that's something different than what we typically see. I like that a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah. It's just a quick 10 minutes and it's for real. If I'm having a breakdown that week, you will hear about it. So,
Cool. Well, I will make sure that link is in the show notes as well if people want to check that out.
thank you.
Um, yeah. So, Kimberly, you've answered this question once before, but if you have a different answer, that would be great. And if not, I don't remember what your first answer was anyway, so I won't know the difference. But this is the greatest podcast in the multiverse. So, can you tell me about how, in a parallel universe, a different choice might have shaped another version of your life?
Ooh, it's an alternate parallel universe. Okay. Um, I don't know. I've always wanted to be a getaway driver. Like,
A getaway driver.
yeah,
All right, you're gonna have to walk me down the process of how that would have looked for you to get to that point. What
I don't
decision
know.
did you
I
make
don't want to
that where you could have been a getaway driver?
I don't want to be a criminal, but
Oh,
how fun would that be? Just to be a getaway driver. Like
that's
just to
hilarious.
I love driving. Just yeah, I'm a different person in the car when it comes.
You must be. You must be.
But I was
I
literally
was not
thinking about
expecting
that the
that.
other day. I was like, oh, how fun would it be to be a getaway driver?
I love it.
So it's a different alternative parallel universe, and why
Yeah,
not? I'm a getaway driver.
absolutely. Yeah, somewhere there, some decision you would have made brought you to become a
Hmm.
getaway driver, and that's what you're doing there.
Yep, drop
That's
the
really
kids off at
cool.
soccer and then go pick up the crew.
Love it. That is definitely the most out there parallel universe story anyone has told me. So thank you. That's so much fun. Kimberly, thank you once again for coming on the show. Can you tell our listeners where the best place to find you and your books are?
Yes. I mainly live on Instagram. You can find me there at kgrimes with a Y, dot writes. And also kimberlygrymes.com/links is the best place to see all my links. And if you're on Substack, I've transitioned my newsletter to Substack, where also my podcast is. And it's such a great community over on Substack too. So check that out.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you once again, Kimberly. I'll link all of that in the show notes, and I hope we get to chat with you again soon.
Hey, thank you for having me, Herman.